Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created us as free beings and given us the obligation to preach the religion. And if you impose upon us a regulation that we have to apply for a permit before we can stand in a masjid and lecture and preach, that is oppression. And so I have never, and I will never apply for any permit anywhere in the world to preach Islam. Islam, the religion, has zero tolerance for oppression. And around the world today, there is universal oppression. And if the believer does not respond to that oppression, does not rise up against the oppressor, does not struggle to liberate the oppressed, then Allah is going to take care of him. Now the second verse that I'm going to quote tonight. The first one was from Surah Al-Isra. The second one is also from Surah Al-Isra. What is the price we pay when the universal oppression, and we do not do what the Egyptian people did, and we do not do what the Tunisian people did, rising up against the oppressor? If we don't do that, what is the price we'll pay? In Surah Al-Isra, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks and He says, وَإِن مِّن قَرْيَةٍ إِلَّا نَحْنُ مُهْلِكُوهَا قَبْلَ يَوْمِ الْقِيَامَةِ أَوْ مُعَذِّبُوهَا عَذَابًا شَدِيدًا كَانَ ذَلِكَ فِي الْكِتَابِ مَسْطُورًا. And not a single city or town will escape. None will escape. But Allah is going to destroy them all before the last day. Allah will destroy every town and every city before the last day. This is the Quran. And those which escape destruction will be punished with terrible punishment. Why? Because the cities today are the centers of oppression, of godlessness, of decadence. And so when the Egyptian people rose up as they did, and the Tunisian people rose up as they did, we say to them, MashaAllah. MashaAllah. Don't come to me and tell me about any CIA and Mossad operation involved here and seek to tarnish the courageous revolt of the people in rising up against oppression. What they did in Egypt and in Tunisia also sends a message to others in different parts of the world who are also oppressors, and they know who they are. That beware, that the noble example of the Egyptian and the Tunisian people can be followed by others, can be emulated by others. And when they rise up, you're going to have to run the way. What was his name? You've forgotten it already. Hosni? Mubarak? And so we begin the lecture by commending the courage of the Egyptian masses and the Tunisian masses, and to strongly resist any effort to tarnish the courageous action with any kind of spurious analysis. We must also speak briefly, my wife is not going to be annoyed with me for this, of the causes of their rising up against oppressors. It was not only political oppression. It was riba, which drove the Egyptian people into such abject poverty and destitution. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala ended the revelation of the Quran, the very last revelation in the Quran, on riba. And in that revelation, He declared war. That if you do not give up riba, فَأَذَنُوا بِحَرْبٍ مِّنَ اللَّهِ وَرَسُولِهِ, then take notice of a declaration of war from Allah and His Messenger. So is it not time for us to spend a little time studying the subject of riba? It's not only lending and borrowing on interest. I'll be brief on this piece. It's not only lending and borrowing on interest so that the money lender will remain permanently rich, because he wants to immunize himself from loss. He doesn't want to do business. Because the essence of a business transaction is that you must assume risk. You can make a profit to suffer a loss. He doesn't want to do that. No. So he lends on interest so that he is immunized from loss. So when an economy is based on riba, the rich will remain permanently rich, and the poor will be imprisoned in permanent poverty. But I don't have to explain this to you. You've been listening to me for years now. You know this already. That's oppression. When the rich are permanently rich, and the poor are imprisoned in permanent poverty forever and ever, that's oppression. And the Prophet ﷺ said, whether riba is big or small, it will end in destitution. So when it reaches that state that Haiti had reached, and Egypt had reached, eventually the masses are going to rise up. And that's why the oppressor has to introduce something very curious, something very mysterious. You may have heard about it before. These apostles of the free market, they introduce something called minimum wage legislation. They have no shame. Absolutely no shame. On the one hand, they say the market must be free. And on the other hand, they bring price control. When Muhammad ﷺ prohibited, they don't even know that. But sometimes the money lender lends you money on interest not only because he wants to remain permanently rich at your expense, but secondly, because he wants to enslave you. That's why he lends you money on interest. So I ask you to read John Perkins' book. You know about it. Confession of an Economic Hitman. And you'll see the story of how they lent on interest in order to enslave Egypt and enslave Tunisia to such an extent that the man, he was a university graduate, and he was selling fruits. And they said, you've got to have a permit to that. Then he took gasoline and poured it on himself and set himself ablaze. And that sparked off the Tunisian uprising. The economic oppression is also in another sphere. And let me also be very brief with it. And I advise you not to repeat my words until you go and study international monetary economics. First do that. You must know your subject before you speak. You take a piece of paper, and you print a picture on it, and you put a number on it, and you say abracadabra. And you assign to that piece of paper an entirely fictitious value. Remember, don't repeat my words unless you study international monetary economics so you know your subject before you speak. If you're assigning an entirely fictitious value to that, this piece of paper has a value of a chicken, and this piece of paper has the value of a cow, and with this piece of paper you could buy a BMW. You could even buy all the oil in Saudi